Welcome to Hacking Hypermobility Podcast.
I'm Luna.
And I'm Shelly.
And we're two Bendy Mamas.
Hacking Hypermobility.
So when we say hypermobility, what do we mean, Shelly?
Well, as I have recently learned, it is a spectrum of inherited disorders and it affects your connective tissue. And it's one of the biggest commonalities in joint hypermobility. And so what is hypermobility? It's bending beyond the range of like what your fingers can do. So I have a lot of bendiness here. See, I go down here, right?
Like in your fingers is what you're saying.
In my fingers and in my toes and in my elbow. I can turn my elbow all kinds of crazy ways, which is cool for party tricks. But doing that often can cause joint pain, stiffness, injuries. You'll eventually lose range of motion, and it can mess up your muscles and your ligaments. You're going to be tired even after you rest. You're going to be tired even after you wake up from a full night's sleep. And when you wake up, you're going to be stiff. Think of the Tin Man, and that's probably a really old dated reference because I'm old. Poor balance and coordination. Your connective tissue holds your body up. It connects you, right? So if you have a problem with your connective tissue, everything that holds you together, this is genetic and you're born with it. And there's nothing you can do about it. But don't despair because we're going to help you.
So before we go further, I think it's important to note that both Shelly and I have something called the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. We'll call it EDS.
Yep.
We'll probably focus most of our discussion on what people are diagnosed as the joint hypermobility syndrome or EDS, just because those JHS and EDS and the subtype of EDS called hypermobile EDS or HEDS are probably the biggest bulk of the inherited connective tissue disorders and those that we personally identify with, and they're the most common. But truly, connective tissue disorders have really what we call systemic manifestations. So it's not just related to your joints.
So what are those comorbidities?
Well, there's a lot, Shelly. As you and I know, we don't have all of them, but we deal with a lot personally. But comorbidities are conditions that are seen frequently in people with hypermobility. So it's like a secondary diagnosis. And sometimes they're even worse than just your joint issues. So our disorder actually happens at the cellular level. It's not just a joint issue. So some of the conditions associated with the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes include some things that are kind of vague that you wouldn't necessarily think are most devastating to some of us have to do with either dysautonomia or autonomic dysfunction, the most common diagnosis seen in EDS patients, or sometimes not even diagnosed and missed, really is called POTS. It stands for postural tachycardia syndrome. We also tend to have skin issues, although skin issues vary across the spectrum with us, like a lot of these symptoms, but a lot of us have stretchy skin. If you're watching, this is a party trick I will do because it doesn't hurt me, but I have very stretchy skin.
See, mine doesn't quite do that.
But it's still beyond.
It's still beyond normal.
Yeah. We bruise easily. We're always covered bruises. Shelly fought a chair recently and the chair won.
So coming up on a week.
It's not beaten. If you're not watching the video podcast, you should just go see us in this episode at least to see what we mean about the bruises.
Just for a minute, yeah.
Yeah, just for this. Widespread stretch marks, very young, and in kind of odd places where you wouldn't expect to see stretch marks, and poor wound healing. Like it takes a long time for wounds to close, to heal. They may reopen, and you may even have abnormal types of scarring called mast cell activation or disorder, and it's related to like an allergic immune response. A lot of us have conditions affecting our oral structures, like our teeth and gums, that sort of thing. Very small mouths, high palates and stuff. Where we have deviated septums, those sinus issues, those sorts of things. This really isn't an exhaustive list because, as Shelley said, connective tissues are all over your body.
Yep.
So many of the connections still aren't fully understood or haven't even really been studied by medicine yet.
It's true. And that's actually one of the most frustrating things about this whole journey I've been on, and you and everyone, is that no one knows about it. And that's why people like you and me, who are not doctors, by the way, are here talking about it, because I don't see very many doctors out there talking about it.
No, that's one of the biggest problems, is there's a big lack of awareness for the hypermobility disorders and hypermobile EDS and Ehlers-Danlos syndromes in general. But then there's also a lack of medical support. So we'll talk more about it as we go, but that's really why Shelley and I are here talking to you, making this podcast and sharing what we've learned, but also hopefully to find out more information and kind of bring together all of the fragmented information to try to support those of us like us.
Yeah. And so you mentioned information and support, and I thought I heard you say you had come across some good information from Social Security the other day. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I always try to stay on top of like news, medical studies and stuff that come out about us. But I actually missed the announcement, or maybe there wasn't one, that the Social Security Administration here in the United States gathered a committee to convene to study the connective tissue disorders. Well, this week they came out and they released their pre-publication of study that they did. So if you're not in the US or you're not that familiar with the Social Security Administration, that's the SSA, it's a national federal government organization, and it's involved in federal disability insurance and supplemental income programs for disabled people. The SSA is tasked an expert committee that they convene to evaluate and provide a report to them, to the government, on the major inherited connective tissue disorders, to provide current information.
Okay, current, good.
Yeah, which is important, regarding diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis of the inherited connective tissue disorders, as well as the effect of their disorders and their treatment on functioning. So they're interested in understanding how these disorders affect our lives and our ability to function, because they're the ones who make the determination whether or not to help disabled people. And they basically decide how disabled we are and whether we can be insured or supported with assistance and income.
Right. Well, that's great. But that report, okay, tell me more. But you said they released it. It's pre-publication?
So it's a pre-publication. So there's these like kind of legal documents that set precedents for that administration to approve disability claims.
Okay.
So that's just a preview of the committee's findings and conclusions.
Okay. So we will put that report in our show notes for this episode and our website, but it's 400 pages. Luna, give us the TLDR.
Well, first, I did read it because I was excited, but also it's because I was at the physical therapy office waiting for my kid to finish, because it's an inherited disorder and guess who has it. So we were at PT, so I had an hour and I read it.
Yeah.
And I definitely just read the introduction and then skipped to their conclusions and findings because I kind of already knew all the other stuff.
Right.
And I didn't just immediately know it. I've done a lot of research over the past couple of years. But anyhow, they have a group of findings. I'm going to kind of read through them, but I wanted to read the introduction because it was exciting to me and just gave me a lot of hope.
So, I haven't read it at all. So
you haven't, like, you didn't
read it. I don't have to.
Well, I think overall, I'm going to tell you my impression of this report is that I think we should be excited and hopeful that there was an effort, number one, to even convene people that are medical experts in this area. So, it brought attention to our complex medical issues for the purposes of managing our disabilities and maybe hopefully less red tape and more support.
That would be great.
But do I trust it would be easy to get disability support, especially in the United States? No. So the SSA's findings overall were encouraging. So I should say that the committee was looking at the most common connective tissue disorders, which includes Marfan syndrome, as well as the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and some others. But those were the two that they focused on. You download the document, the overall conclusions are all the way down in chapter 6, and it's like page 289. And I'm just going to kind of go over small little segments here because it's kind of a cumbersome document, but I think all of their findings were important. So I'm not going to skip any of them. We're going to go through them. So in their introduction, I'm going to start there. They give some interesting perspective that I think is important. Okay. So we've already kind of touched on some of this, but I'm going to read what they wrote.
Straight from the SSA's mouth.
Yeah, straight from the expert
SSA's hired
medical
experts.
Professionals that convened, tasked by the SSA. Connective tissues, HDCTs are how they reference them, are a group of inherited disorders that affect connective tissues throughout the body.
Okay.
Connective tissue is an integral component of all organ systems and plays a crucial role in their function. Hence the physical and medical secondary impairments that manifest throughout the body and can affect functioning in every body system. That big point that we were making. And then in their introduction, it kind of gives you a hint as to where their findings go. But they say physical and mental secondary impairments associated with the HDCTs may develop and vary in severity over time. And the introduction was bigger, and then they break down each connective tissue disorder that they looked at and known research and diagnosis and clinical applications, all that fun stuff. But great. At the end, the report goes into like what I guess most of us care about, their conclusions.
Right.
So their first conclusion was this: the heritable disorders of connective tissue comprise a large and varied group of disorders in children and adults, and I'm glad they said children,
yes,
that share the common feature of pronounced involvement of connective tissues, usually in multiple organ systems.
Mm-hmm.
The HDCTs can lead to a variety of physical and mental secondary impairments and associated functional limitations. That's key because they acknowledge
that is a gift.
Yes.
Functional limitations.
Yes. So they acknowledged it's physical and mental, that there are a lot of comorbidities, and that there are functional limitations. I feel so validated already. And this is like, what are we in the second point here?
Yeah, but like, okay, I have questions. This worries me. And I'm going to tell you why, because people are getting diagnosed. Well, no, it doesn't worry me because this is in their document about disability. I guess where I was going was I was afraid that they're going to say everybody has it, therefore nobody's disabled.
So you can't be impaired. Yeah.
That's
so.
Okay.
Well, the next sentence literally says impairments can range from minor to severe.
Okay.
And even life-threatening, and may fluctuate in severity over time in an individual.
Okay. All right. I feel better about that now.
What Shelley was concerned about, they addressed. And that's one of the most puzzling things, I think, to medicine, but also that contributes to the lack of awareness and effective treatment and why we're missed. Right. Is because of this variety and fluctuation. And so in terms of disability and assistance, the government is thinking mostly in terms of work and school. And they do address that functional limitations can affect participation in work, school, as well as social and recreational activities, and may include precautions, restrictions, that sort of thing. So they are acknowledging that it can range from, minor to severe,
right,
but even deadly, and we'll talk about that. That's something that we face.
Yep.
But that's just section 1. It's already, I think we're on a good path, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the second point is more specific to this in terms of the SSA.
Okay.
So some of the SSA's adult listings, and what they mean is what they have like codified as adult disability diagnoses.
Oh, I've been looking at that because I
Mm-hmm.
recently applied. So
Right.
I know what you're talking
Applied
about.
directly to what are considered secondary impairments experienced by many individuals with the connective tissue disorders.
Okay.
And they could be used to evaluate disability in those individuals. Other listings with some modification may not be considered like full disability on its own,
Okay.
but could certainly apply to secondary impairments experienced by some of us. So what they're saying is like they're acknowledging this is a combination of issues for
Okay. Totality of the
patients like us.
circumstances.
Exactly.
Whole picture.
That's the key word. I'm going to repeat what you just said. Totality of circumstances. And it's very evident to me as we keep reading that not only are they interested in the totality of our circumstances, but also how did we get here? So, bullet point number 3, nearest and dearest to my heart, early diagnosis of the connective tissue disorders is important to reduce physical injury,
Yep.
reduce psychological harm to the individual and family members, and prevent the risks associated with inappropriate or fragmented medical care.
Yep.
That to me may be the single most powerful sentence written in this report.
Yeah.
Because that tells me these professionals
They recognize
that understand our disorders recognize how literally traumatic it is for a family, how disabling it is, and how lacking the medical care can be to support us. Yes.
Their eyes are open, it seems. So that's good.
Yes, definitely. So, you may be listening to us talk about like this could even be life-threatening. It's systemic. It's missed. And you're thinking, well, what can I do? Right? That's the question I get asked most often is there a cure?
It's genetic. There's no cure. What's the point?
Right. So although
There's a
curative
point.
treatments for the connective tissue disorders don't exist at this time, appropriate understanding and management of the disorders can still reduce the frequency and severity of their manifestations and resulting functional consequences.
Yep.
So just because there aren't cures doesn't mean there aren't things that we can do. And by things we can do, I mean as patients, but also things we in the community, those of us supporting these patients in the medical community can be doing things as well.
Yep.
So continuing with number 4, they also say that high quality care for an individual with inherited connective tissue disorders relies on effective coordination among a team of clinicians across a broad range of physical and mental health care disciplines who are knowledgeable about these disorders.
That would be nice.
Right. So that's why I was like, I'm waiting to see Shelley's reaction.
I'm like,
yeah.
yes, please.
Yes, that would be lovely. That is one of our biggest frustrations, trying to coordinate care. Just get care, find somebody who knows what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So number 5, bookending that, access to comprehensive multidisciplinary care for diagnosis.
When did you get in here? I have a cat in here. So, hold on.
The previous interruption was brought to you by Dinah, Shelley's cat. What Luna was trying to say was that access to comprehensive, multidisciplinary care for the diagnosis and management of connective tissue disorders can be limited by geography and other factors, including the availability of care teams with expertise in the disorders. Okay, let's continue.
So the 6th bullet point goes more into the problems with why we are lacking in clinical application.
Oh,
So it
okay.
says education about the heritable connective tissue disorders, including all of it, the multisystem manifestations, actual diagnosis, and management, is important for all clinicians to help increase recognition and earlier diagnosis and enable the provision of appropriate care.
They need to also include it, and I don't know if this isn't on SSA's thing, but sorry, the ADHD is just going to interrupt here for a second. You know where else that needs to be included? Like on, you know how they do the hearing screening at schools, like the hearing and eye screening in like second grade or something?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why aren't they doing hypermobility screening?
Your point, I have something to add on to that point. We
Okay.
miss
I'm sorry.
perfect
I thought I derailed
opportunities
this.
for screening.
Yeah.
One of the biggest opportunities for screening in the US is that in public school systems, we are doing vision screenings.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most obvious ways to see connective tissue disorders is in your eyeball.
Yep.
Also, we should be screening for hypermobility in the sports where
That's
people
what I
are
was
found
thinking,
that are hypermobile. Gymnastics, dance, cheerleading, those sorts of things. But also, we haven't quite touched on it. We did a little bit. One of the big comorbidities that a lot of people seem to have their mind blown is what we call neurodivergence, and that's a neurodevelopmental disorder such as ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, sensory processing, and there's others.
Dyslexia and all that, right?
Yeah, we really should be. I would love to find some way to raise our voices to like request that there's a dual referral for those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So tangent aside, the next thing is something that like I've thought about because I've been doing it myself and it's frustrating, but I'd never even thought about like, wow, how nice is it that they're acknowledging this? Education of individuals with the disorders and their families, as well as employers and staff, is important to improve the quality of life for affected individuals and their families and to facilitate appropriate accommodations at work and school.
Beautiful.
And to help inform the disability assessment and determination process. Because I have recently gone through these things. I still work full time, and I had to go through some disability processes at work to get some accommodations. And then I was also doing that for my child as she's going from elementary school and up into middle school because of the demands being increasingly difficult for her disability.
Yeah, especially, and I don't know if this was a concern, like my daughter, her high school stairs are a big problem.
Yeah, and that's like when in their elementary, they're typically not in buildings that are that large that there would be stairs. Right. But here in middle school and high school, there are stairwells, and the kids aren't allowed to take the elevators.
Nope, you need a special key and a pass. And then when you have the elevator key, you get harassed by people. Right.
Yeah, and then also here, post-pandemic, they still don't use their lockers. So they're carrying their book bags full of everything they need for every class all day in between all 7 periods. Up and down stairs. Anyhow, the 8th conclusion is something that I'm super passionate about and is definitely one of my special interests. Ongoing research on the heritable connective tissue disorders is important to advance understanding of the disorders and their effects.
Yep.
In particular, research on care services and interventions for the heritable connective tissue disorders and secondary impairments is needed. Like we said at the beginning, you said, hey, let's go over all those comorbidities. And I said, well, like, we can talk about them. Yeah, we can talk about them. This is a small list, but also like we don't really even know the whys or the exact links, and it hasn't really been studied. We just are all anecdotally discovering, oh, we all have this issue.
You just like broke my brain. So
right, and in such a good way.
It is good, but also it's like it's making me almost want to hit the wall where it's like so much, and then it's like I get excited, but then you like freeze.
It makes you feel excited, but like you're going to hit the wall in terms of what?
So when I first, I'm excited, but I feel overwhelmed because it's exciting and there's a lot of new stuff coming down the pike. It's just like, it's a spiral, right? Like, yeah, more people are learning. Yeah, more information. Yeah, you know, it's exciting, but it's just a little scary. And I think I'm only scared because I am super prone to hyper fixating on something and getting lost almost into a black hole. So I think I'm less prone to that now that I'm more aware that I'm prone to it. Awareness is key, but that's all. That's why it's exciting, but I'm like, meh. So anyway,
I think for me, having it all written in black and white and feeling, you know, first, oh, this is all really validating. These are things that like we've said and thought and discussed.
Yeah.
But then also it was validating. Like there it is in black and white. Other people agree.
Validating. But I've been so right about so many things in my life and no one has given a fuck.
No one's listened.
So I'm kind of like, they're saying in black and white, yeah, da-da-da-da. And then it's just going to be like, well, denied.
Well, and so that's the other thing that I worry about is like, okay, well, this is a pre-publication. So it's not like, are they still going to be hesitant to listen? And those problems are still there. It doesn't solve the problem by just saying it is a problem. The medical system moves very slowly. The government moves really slowly.
Yes.
You know, we're talking about a lot of disconnected things too that need somehow connected. Kind of a great allegory for our lack of connective tissue. Anyhow.
Yeah.
But you know, so like it's very hopeful to read all those things and like see it acknowledged, but then it also like spelled out and makes you realize like the actual state of our care and the awareness and diagnosis.
Yeah.
But there are other good things I've seen too, like the EDS Society, their newest studies, they got a big grant and they're studying some interesting things that like I thought were going to take forever to get acknowledged, the epigenetic aspect and adolescence.
Yeah, you're okay. You're right. I'm not being pessimistic. I've just always been more of a realist. Like,
yeah, that me too.
Yeah. This is awesome.
But now let's come back down here because that's a group of, I forget how many people, but those are a group of people that are very educated on these issues.
Right.
So how's that going to filter out?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was a lot. Let's do we got any lighter content for this episode? Because you know,
maybe